Welcome to the OLV Daily Reflection for Wednesday, October 14th. Today, the Universal Church celebrates St. Callistus. He served as Pope during the beginning of the 3rd century, and he was eventually martyred for the faith in the year 223. He was the second Pope after St. Peter to have been martyred. In honor of this Pope and martyr of the Church, the Gospel passage for today's Mass comes to us from the 22nd chapter of the Gospel of Luke. It reads, "An argument broke out among the apostles about which of them should be regarded as the greatest. Jesus said to them, 'The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in authority over them are addressed as benefactors. But among you it shall not be so. Rather, let the greatest among you be as the youngest, and the leader as the servant.'" In order to better understand this passage, I believe it's important to visit the 3 verses that happened before this passage for today. And these 3 verses read, Jesus said, "And yet behold, the hand of the one who is to betray me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man indeed goes as has been determined. But woe to that man by whom is betrayed." And they began to debate among themselves who among them would do such a deed. Therefore the disciples were first debating about who would betray Jesus, and as a result of this argument they began to argue about who among them should be regarded as the greatest. I think all of us could agree this was not the greatest moment for the disciples. And there's another important reality that I should point out about this encounter. Jesus' death was near. He knew that he would soon be killed. So the words of Jesus at the end of this passage are meant to address the sinfulness of the disciples, but these words of Christ also speak to how he will spend his final hours on earth. Jesus, who is the Christ, the anointed Messiah of Israel, will fulfill his role of being Messiah by becoming a suffering servant who takes on the sins of all of us through his death on the cross. So if the disciples didn't understand these words of Jesus in today's gospel when he said them at that moment, Jesus' actions on the cross would have made them clear. They knew exactly what he meant. And I think this next statement is obvious, but it needs to be said. Not only did Jesus show forth what the servant leadership would look like, but it came at a great cost. He had to surrender his life in order to redeem our lives. So when someone is a servant, when someone is willing to be a leader who puts the needs of others before their own, a sacrifice has to be made. And each of the apostles learned about this in their own lives, because as we know, each of them were martyred. So they end up to surrendering their lives because they became servants of the church. They devoted their lives to spreading not only the teachings of Christ, but also imitating him in their death. So when we look at servant leadership in our own lives, and hopefully making the choice to follow servant leadership, we will have to accept the cost that comes with this choice. And sacrifices will have to be made. I also know that before we can even get to the point of taking on the desire of servant leadership, we need to make sure that we have our sinfulness under control. So we don't imitate the disciples who in the gospel today missed out probably on the whole lesson. But again, once they had their sinfulness under control, once they realized what was going on, they could not only take on the mantle of servant leadership, but lived it to such an extent in their life that they were willing to give of themselves as martyrs. So as we continue in our own lives, let us truly pray that we can be open to being leaders who serve, men and women who imitate Jesus Christ, by our willingness to give of ourselves for others. Our Lady of Victory, pray for us.